Sennacherib and the Bible. Sennacherib's presence in biblical literature represents one of the most dramatic confrontations between divine power and imperial might in ancient Near Eastern history. The Assyrian king's invasion of Judah in 701 BC is documented in multiple biblical accounts and has generated extensive theological, historical and archaeological discussion for over 2 millennia. Biblical accounts and sources. The biblical narrative of Sennacherib's campaign appears in 3 separate but related accounts: 2 Kings 18, 19, Isaiah 36, 37, and 2 Chronicles 32. These passages provide the most detailed description of any foreign ruler's interaction with the Kingdom of Judah, reflecting the profound impact this event had on biblical consciousness. The accounts share remarkable consistency in their core narrative, while offering varying perspectives and emphases. The 2 Kings and Isaiah versions are nearly identical, suggesting a common source, while 2 Chronicles provides additional details about Hezekiah's preparations and the theological significance of the events. Biblical scholars note that these passages reference the most traumatic events that the small kingdom would experience through the 4 centuries or so of its existence. The campaign's aftermath completely changed the kingdom's demography, economy, settlement patterns, and political position within the Assyrian sphere of hegemony. The political and religious context. When Sennacherib ascended to the Assyrian throne in 705 BC, following his father Sargon II's death, King Hezekiah of Judah joined a coalition of Western states in rebellion against Assyrian rule. This rebellion was encouraged by Egypt and represented a direct challenge to Assyrian imperial authority. The biblical account emphasizes that Hezekiah had undertaken significant religious reforms, centralizing worship in Jerusalem and destroying local shrines throughout Judah. This reform program became a point of contention during the siege, as Assyrian negotiators mockingly suggested that Hezekiah had weakened his position with God by removing these worship sites. Hezekiah's preparations for the anticipated siege included remarkable engineering projects, most notably the construction of a water tunnel system that brought water from the Gihon spring into the city. This 533-meter tunnel, known today as Hezekiah's Tunnel, demonstrates the king's determination to withstand a prolonged siege. The siege narrative, Assyrian demands, and psychological warfare. The biblical account provides extraordinary detail about Assyrian siege tactics and psychological warfare. Sennacherib's field commander, the Rabshakeh, employed sophisticated propaganda techniques designed to demoralize Jerusalem's defenders. The Assyrian negotiator deliberately spoke in Hebrew rather than Aramaic, ensuring that ordinary citizens on the walls could understand his message. His speech employed several rhetorical strategies, questioning Hezekiah's military preparations, ridiculing Judah's alliance with Egypt, that splintered reed, and most provocatively claiming that Yahweh himself had commanded the Assyrian invasion. The Rabshakeh's theological arguments reveal sophisticated understanding of Judean religious concepts. He argued that Hezekiah's religious reforms had actually weakened Judah's relationship with God, and that no deity of any conquered nation had been able to resist Assyrian might. This direct challenge to Yahweh's sovereignty forms the theological heart of the biblical narrative. Hezekiah's response. The biblical portrayal of Hezekiah during this crisis emphasizes his piety and reliance on divine guidance. When faced with the Assyrian ultimatum, Hezekiah performed several acts that demonstrate his religious devotion. He dressed in sackcloth as a sign of mourning and humility before God. He consulted the prophet Isaiah, seeking divine guidance rather than relying solely on military strategy. Most dramatically, he took the Assyrian letter demanding surrender and spread it before the Lord in the temple, offering one of the most moving prayers recorded in biblical literature. Hezekiah's prayer emphasizes that the honor of God himself was at stake. So now, O Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. The divine intervention. Isaiah's prophecy. The prophet Isaiah plays a central role in the biblical narrative, delivering God's response to both Hezekiah's prayer and Sennacherib's blasphemy. Isaiah's oracle against Sennacherib represents some of the most powerful poetry in biblical prophetic literature. The prophecy employs vivid metaphors to describe God's control over the Assyrian king. I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will make you return by the way you came. Isaiah assures Hezekiah that Jerusalem will not fall. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow there or come before it with shield or cast up a siege mound against it. This specific prophecy becomes crucial for evaluating the historical outcome of the siege. The miraculous defeat. The climax of the biblical narrative describes a supernatural intervention that devastates the Assyrian army. According to the text, that night the angel of the Lord went out and killed 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When they got up early the next morning, there were all the corpses. This dramatic intervention is presented as divine vindication of Yahweh's power against imperial blasphemy. The number 185,000 has generated scholarly debate, with some suggesting textual corruption, but the core claim of miraculous defeat remains central to the biblical account. The biblical authors emphasize that this victory came through divine power rather than human military strength, contrasting with typical ancient Near Eastern victory accounts that celebrated royal prowess. The Taylor Prism and Assyrian records. The discovery and decipherment of Sennacherib's own account of the campaign, preserved on the Taylor Prism and other cuneiform documents, provides remarkable external confirmation of the biblical narrative's historical framework. Sennacherib's annals confirm key biblical details. The campaign occurred in 701 BC during Hezekiah's reign. The Assyrians captured 46 fortified cities in Judah. They besieged Jerusalem, and Hezekiah paid substantial tribute. The famous boast that Sennacherib confined Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage parallels the biblical account of the siege. However, Sennacherib's records conspicuously avoid claiming to have captured Jerusalem or defeated Hezekiah militarily. This omission is particularly striking given Assyrian royal practice of documenting complete victories. Archaeological discoveries. Excavations in Jerusalem have uncovered an administrative building from the 8th century BC that shows clear evidence of the transition from Judean to Assyrian control. Archaeologists discovered stamped jar handles used for tax collection that reveal how taxation shifted from Hezekiah to Assyrian authorities after the siege. The widespread destruction layer found at sites throughout Judah, including the dramatic evidence from Lachish, corroborates the biblical and Assyrian accounts of the campaign's devastating impact on the kingdom. These archaeological findings demonstrate that Sennacherib's invasion represented one of the most traumatic events in Judean history. Theological significance in biblical literature. Divine sovereignty theme. The Sennacherib narrative serves multiple theological functions within biblical literature. Most fundamentally, it demonstrates the sovereignty of Israel's God over the greatest military power of the age. The story functions as a theodicy, explaining how God protects the faithful during seemingly impossible circumstances. Prophetic fulfillment. The narrative demonstrates the reliability of prophetic pronouncement as Isaiah's specific predictions about Jerusalem's deliverance come to pass. This prophetic fulfillment strengthens the biblical claim that God communicates through chosen messengers. Historical and scholarly debates. Some scholars have proposed that these accounts describe two separate campaigns, with Sennacherib returning after 688 BC for a second invasion that ended in disaster. However, this two-campaign theory has been largely rejected due to lack of supporting evidence. Most contemporary scholars accept that both accounts describe the same 701 BC campaign, but emphasize different aspects of its outcome. As one analysis notes, both sides had reasons to see themselves as the victor in the conflict, similar to how both Britain and America claimed victory in the War of 1812. The miraculous elements in the biblical account have generated extensive scholarly debate about historical reliability. Archaeological evidence increasingly supports the biblical account's basic historical framework while remaining neutral on supernatural claims. Western literary tradition. The dramatic story of Sennacherib's defeat has inspired extensive artistic and literary treatment throughout Western culture. Lord Byron's famous poem, The Destruction of Sennacherib, captures the account's dramatic power. The Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. Medieval manuscript illustrations frequently depicted the siege of Jerusalem, demonstrating the narrative's continued cultural significance. Contemporary relevance. The Sennacherib narrative continues to resonate in contemporary religious and political discourse. For religious communities, it represents the ultimate triumph of faith over seemingly insurmountable political and military challenges. Whether approached as religious text, historical document, or literary masterpiece, the biblical account of Sennacherib's invasion remains one of the most compelling narratives in ancient literature.
I am Sennacherib, mighty king. If my story has moved you, like this tale, share it so my name lives on, and subscribe to hear more of my legacy. Tell me, is true power in conquest or in the stories we leave behind?